In this episode of the NESN Bruins podcast, we look back on an ultimately disappointing Game 7 loss for the Bruins. We look at where they stand now, whether this season ultimately was a success, where they go from here, and how this will define their legacies moving forward. We also do a quick preview of the offseason and start to look ahead already to the upcoming season. Hey everybody, welcome into the NESN Bruins podcast for the final time. Well, I guess maybe not the final time this season, but for the final time as it pertains to the Stanley Cup final. We are here to discuss Boston Bruins hockey. 1 day removed from the Bruins Game 7 loss in the Stanley Cup final to the St. Louis Blues. I'm NESN.com's Mike Colt, joined as always by Logan Mullen. Logan, it feels like we just did this.
Yeah, well, two days ago we
That's
did.
Right.
This is an unprecedented pace for us, just in time for the season.
We are putting in work. Luckily, or unfortunately, I should say, we don't get paid by the podcast.
No,
we'd be putting in
just bathing in cash.
A lot of billable hours for us right now. But what we're going to do here today is we're going to talk about Game 7. The Bruins lost, a disappointing scene of events for them. We will do a little maybe kind of just a state of the Bruins, how they, and we kind of touched on this the other day, but how they kind of played up to our expectations this season, where they're at now as a franchise, both in terms of their roster, also just kind of some big picture, legacy type stuff. Yeah. And then we'll do a quick preview of the offseason, kind of hit on a few things there. We will hopefully reconvene before we go on our merry way for the summer.
Yeah, I think we talked about right after the draft.
Correct. The draft.
Before and after.
When is the draft? You know off the top of your head?
Next week.
That's what I say. It's got to be
tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. So there you go. So hopefully we'll get back in here for a little free agency preview. But spoiler alert, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a whole lot to sink our teeth into in that regard, at least from the Bruins standpoint. So, all right, Game 7. I'm guessing anyone listening to this watched the game, so we don't need to do a huge deep dive. But it started well enough for the Bruins. I thought there was, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but like St. Louis had one or two really good shifts early on in the first minute or two, and then the Bruins just took over.
Well, yeah, and that was my thing watching it last night was when the Blues came out as hot as they did, literally for 2, maybe 3 minutes.
Right.
I was thinking, well, the Bruins could be in a world of hurt right now because the Blues were throwing weight, they were imposing their will, and I thought the tenor kind of shift when the Parayko delay a game penalty happened.
Sure.
But once the Bruins didn't cash in on that and Binnington made some pretty good saves, because that was the other thing. During that early stretch, Binnington had really bad rebound control. Mm-hmm. It felt, throughout the game, really, I thought there were a lot of layers where it was similar to Game 5, and that the Bruins controlled the first period, and then once they didn't score and cash in on those opportunities, it was kind of like, well, This could be bad, and especially the way the period ended with the Pietrangelo goal with 7.9 seconds left. We can get into the clownery that Brad Marchand put on in that display there. But once the Blues went up 2-0 rather, you could tell that things were starting to kind of trend south for the Bruins. And the fact that there was no scoring either in the second period, and that they went into that third period down 2, that just seemed daunting from the beginning.
I mean, it's not a very hard game to break down. I mean, it was, the Bruins outshot the Blues 17-8 in the first, and it felt even more lopsided than that. But, St. Louis cashing in on 2 of them. One of them, I mean, it was just like classic hockey, right? Like, Bruins just dominating for most of that period, and the Blues get a tip from the mid to high slot.
Yeah, that O'Reilly goal was nice.
It's just kind of tough to blame that on anyone. Carlo kind of had him checked, but he maybe could have done a little bit more. But O'Reilly's just playing out of his mind right now.
Right.
And as you mentioned, a terrible decision by Brad Marchand led to that second goal. And I mean, to give up that goal with 7.9 seconds left is just so backbreaking, especially against a team like the Blues where you knew going into that game, 1 game, 60 minutes for the Stanley Cup, if they got any sort of a lead, they were going to pack it in and play as annoyingly as possible.
Well, yeah, and I thought that the Blues did a really good job of that, of sort of parking the bus in a sense once they got up, because then it was pretty much up to the Bruins. And with the Marchand thing, I did not particularly buy his description of it post-game. Now, it didn't seem like he had put a lot of thought into it. Its description was basically like, I haven't seen the replay, but I thought that Schwartz was all alone. And I went back and I watched it, and Marchand, even though he's skating with his back to the play as he goes to the bench, once he turns around and sees that Schwartz is coming in with speed, he sees Schwartz long enough to where he should be able to see that there's other guys joining the rush.
He was skating backward, right?
He was.
Right,
and he went stationary, and Schwartz made the easy move, the pass off the wall.
Right, he's coming down the wall, right, yeah.
Right, so Marchand's explanation was that he didn't see that Pietrangelo was coming, essentially. And by going for that shift change, because he originally went to it before.
Right.
Because he thought the Bruins still had the puck in their zone. He went to the bench. I think it was Johansson that was about to come on. The bench must have been shouting for Marchand, like, hey, the puck is coming. Yeah. So Marchand told, I think it was Johansson, to stay. And basically stayed stationary, which is kind of all you can do because he had slowed up a little bit and made that sort of half-assed play to try and stop Schwartz, and then went to the bench. And so his reasoning for going to the bench after the play on Schwartz was that he didn't know that somebody else was coming, which that makes a little bit of sense if for some reason your back's to the blue line.
Right.
But he should have been able to see clearly, I think, that Pietrangelo was joining the rush, because by Marchand leaving, that's why Pietrangelo had all that space to come in. I mean, he had so much time and space on a rush like that. So I didn't really accept Marchand's excuse for that, but to his credit, I really don't think he had much time to see the replay or sort of process what had happened.
It looked like a video game player who was being controlled by someone who didn't know what the buttons do, and it just was kind of in a weird spot. And in a Game 7 situation like that, every little play means so much. And to give up that goal when they did, how they did, is just so hard to come back from. And my thing was like, well, if the Bruins, if they're able to cut this to 1 by the end of the second period, you take your chances. Like, you should be able to get 1 goal in the third period to tie the game.
They've been a great third period team.
Right, and they've been able to come from behind, but you needed to get that first one before St. Louis got to 3.
Yeah.
I guess you technically could have gotten out of the second period 3-2, but lots being made of those 2 goals in the first period by St. Louis. A lot's being made by what they did in the third period. But I think really their second period performance was the most impressive thing they did all night. Yeah. They limited the Bruins to 8 shots. That period flew by. It felt like a snap of a finger and it's over. And the Bruins didn't get anything in way of chances that period. Well, and then like I said, you're down 2-0 after 2, and this game's over.
Yeah, well, and I haven't taken the time to look at Natural Stat Trick and see what these numbers are, but for as many shots as the Bruins had, I think it was 34, it seemed like so few were high danger opportunities. There's that Marchand one on the power play. There was the Nordstrom one on the doorstep. But one more thing on the Marchand line change thing.
Yeah.
It was astounding to me that he tried to change with less than 10 seconds left, too. Like, obviously, it was a gut punch, the timing of the goal. But it was a ludicrous decision, and he gets away with it enough to where it doesn't really become a problem. But he doesn't typically play by the typical rules of everybody on, everybody off. He sort of freelances a little bit, and eventually you're going to lead yourself astray doing that. And so he understandably was gassed because he had been out there too long, but you have to have the wherewithal to know there's 10 seconds left. I'm not going to try and change shifts. What does that do for anybody?
Right. I was looking up I was hoping that you could finish your thought, but he played I'm looking up the shift chart real quick just to see what it was. I mean, he had 2 shifts of 45 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds in the final 2 minutes of that period.
Right.
It was ridiculous. So I think that certainly, it's one of those things too where you get to the end of the period, end of a long shift, you're going to be gassed, you're going to make dumb decisions. I think that's kind of where they end up in that situation.
Yeah, you can't blame him for being gassed, but some of it was on his own doing for skating. Right.
I mean, that's let's see here. He skated a 31-second shift with 3 minutes left, and that last one he was on the ice for the last minute 32 of that period.
Jeez. So where are you doing?
That's a lot. Granted, it were some sustained offensive zone time there.
Yeah.
But still, then it's just systematic with the way the night went too. It was just a frustrating night for the Bruins. Bennington was fantastic. I mean, I guess that's maybe that was one. I don't remember talking to you about that the other day in terms of when we were previewing Game 7. I feel like that's the only thing that I had considered at some point in thinking about Game 7, but never really spoken into existence. That would be the Jordan Binnington game. Yeah. But at least for 2 out of the 3 periods, it certainly was. I mean, he was awesome early on, and then our colleague Adam London and I were talking about it this morning, and he asked me, he's like, what was the one time that you, like, when did you think that this game was just, you knew that it was over? And it was the save on Johansson. Like, that was like, you're like, this is done. There, you know, he's not going to give up one in time for you to get back into the game, and you're snake bit.
Well, and similarly to Game 5, when Binnington seemed like he was a little all over the place the first few minutes, and the fact that the Bruins couldn't cash in on that opportunity, because we have seen that before where Binnington was a little erratic during the first few minutes, and if you capitalize on that opportunity, great. But, I mean, the Bruins could have had 3-4 goals in the first period. The fact that they got none while Binnington was playing that way, you could tell that kind of did them in.
Yeah, and it's actually credit to the NBC broadcast. It might have even been Pierre McGuire, who I know people don't like to give credit to, but I think he might have said, I just realized I messed up. It was not 132. I want to go back and correct that. He played the last 51 seconds over the course of 2 minutes, so it wasn't even close to 132. He played the final 132 of the game, which is still long, so I just wanted to correct that. But going back to the point, like, I think it was Pierre who mentioned, like, Binnington likes to feel the puck, and like they showed him before the game, I forget which game it was, kind of just flipping the puck back and forth to himself, almost like juggling one puck and kind of just feeling it on his block or feeling it in his catching glove, you know, kind of moving it around on the ice. And it almost seemed like you see him play like that, where he's kind of all over the place. Maybe it takes him a few minutes to really get settled in, but like what you said, once he gets settled in, he looked good. So
yeah,
it's tough. Bruins first line, I think, was a continued issue. If you really think about it, like, I mean, they played great in Game 7 against Toronto.
Yep.
There were spots here and there where they played really well, but like, by and large, this entire playoff, all 4 rounds, they weren't very good.
Right, and to a certain extent, I can sympathize with the fact that all 4 teams that they played, and every team they play over the course of the season, they are hell-bent on stopping the top line. So
this has been your point all along.
Right, it's going to get particular emphasis. However, we have seen enough of a sample size with each one of those guys on the top line to know that they're actually capable of performing in the postseason. Right. And pretty much all of them have spent most of their career in a top line role. I know it was a little different for Marchand early on, but Marchand was up there in point totals for the Bruins often during the postseason. Bergeron was basically a ghost. And again, we all are very well aware of what he's capable of doing during the playoffs. I mean, we've seen Pastrnak last year ran absolute circles around the Maple Leafs. For a while now, we had been talking about David Pastrnak as this great clutch postseason performer, and I'd say at times he almost was more absent than Bergeron, it seemed. Because at least Bergeron, I didn't think at any point he looked like a liability in the defensive end, like he was still sound in that area. But if you're not getting offense from Pastrnak, it's probably a little strong, but he's essentially rendered useless. You know, it's not like he's a particularly strong defensive forward.
They scored, I just looked it up. This is actually more surprising than I would have imagined. 6, 12, 14 even strength goals in the playoffs, that line did. But Marchand had 3 empty net goals as well, so I don't know, it is what it is.
I know even in this series early on.
The numbers look okay in the Cup final, but it's not.
Right.
And then a lot of their offense came from the power play, too. Like, they really dominated 5-on-5.
Well, because I was looking last night, I was fascinated to see what their Corsi was going to be. And I forgot, I didn't even look at making sure it was a 5-on-5 situation. So I think the numbers might have been a little skewed because I think I did all situations. Because they were good on the power play, but it's just, hey, at a certain point, you have to score 5-on-5. You can't be relying on that. And knowing too, I don't think it was a surprise that there was only 1 penalty called in Game 7, so it didn't make a ton of sense. I don't think this was necessarily a game plan, but to be hinging on, oh well, we're just going to execute on the power play. Like they never figured out how to score 5-on-5.
Yeah, and I mean, it's when you go the entire season, believing you're one thing, and that's a great 5-on-5 team, especially when that line is on the ice and you don't get that in the playoffs. It's a miracle that really, if you think about it, they got as far as they did. That's in large part because they got a lot of good, good play, good production out of the third and fourth lines. But that's, It doesn't seem very sustained. At some point, your big guns have to kind of step up and win you games.
Right.
We saw that in Game 7 of the Toronto series where these guys did step up, and they've done it before, especially Bergeron. You thought maybe Game 7 of the Cup final would be where that finally happens. It just didn't happen. You lose the game. Sometimes it's that simple.
Well, and I think I had said, and I believed it when we had our podcast the other day, that if Bergeron scored, there's probably the Bruins were going to win. It just seemed incredibly likely that Bergeron got a goal, the Bruins were going to win. And
there's that stat too from Marchand. Was he 25 and 1? Yeah, something like when he scores a goal in the playoffs. So didn't work out. It wasn't meant to be. Anything else? You really want to talk about Joakim Nordstrom? And
no, I will say I'll add that because I will fully admit that I probably have chronic backache from carrying Joakim Nordstrom's water so much this season, but I thought it was a travesty that he played the most minutes of any forward in Game 6. He had 18 minutes, and something like that. And then there's just this colossal change where he played the fewest of any player on the Bruins in Game 7.
It's almost because they were chasing 2 goals for 40 minutes.
Well, he's your best defensive forward, so it's like he probably prevents things from getting much worse. I thought he had good jump.
He was fine
in the beginning, and he played, I think, almost 5 minutes in the first period. So it was really the last 2 periods that he didn't get much of an opportunity. But I found it interesting that there's just this major philosophical change. But when you're chasing, there's kind of not much you can do.
Tuukka Rask, what'd you think? Did you write that for NESN.com last night? Was that you or did we have a story saying don't blame Tuukka Rask?
I think our coworker Mike McMahon wrote that. Okay. Because that was Bruce Cassidy was asked about that, and Cassidy basically said he doesn't think that criticism should fall on him.
Right, but. Yes, and we're already, I don't want to sound like a talk radio host, but we've already come through the other side now when it comes to Tuukka Rask, where it's like he's now above criticism for,
it was a total snap.
The Tuukka thing has turned into like a straw man now, where you have everybody is defending Tuukka Rask against these boogeymen who think he's the worst goalie. Nobody thinks Tuukka Rask is bad now. I don't think
it did switch a lot.
If you do think Tuukka Rask is bad, You've eliminated yourself from any sort of conversation.
You out yourself as an idiot.
Right, yes. Right. And not just when it comes to hockey or sports, life. I don't want to associate myself with people like that because it's so laughable and you just can't argue that.
Right.
He's
just
good.
A clown.
Yeah, no kid. Yeah, right. Or a troll. Or both. But
or doing afternoons 2 to 6 on the sports hub.
He's not above criticism though. And I think he played fine in Game 7. Mm-hmm. It would have been nice, though, if you're the Bruins, to get one of those Carolina performances from him in Game 7. And the only goal I really had a problem with, but it ended up being really the most important goal of the game, was the second one. And that was, by and large, Marchand's fault. And, the Bruins put him in a bad spot there. But, that puck got in under his arm, if I recall correctly. It's just, on a defenseman, 8 seconds left in the period. You just got to get us to the dressing room. Yeah, that's the... Those are when in one game for the Stanley Cup, those are the kind of plays that you need to have.
Right. Well, so my thing is I don't blame him squarely for any of the 3 goals. However, at least one of them, it should, particularly the second, it's the type of thing where you've got to get that save.
Yeah.
He
makes the save on that second one. It's totally, you're going in there. It's all right, we're only down 1. Great save, Tuukka.
Right.
We're going to get one here.
Brad, what the hell were you doing?
Right. It's a lot easier to yell at Brad and be like, hey, figure it out.
Let's not do that again. But, he's gotten to the point where, he's now so revered, I guess, that if you're going to be a big game goalie, you've got to, that is the type of save that you make that bails your team out. Yeah. And, again, Pietrangelo was wide open. He was left on an island, basically, with Rask. So I don't totally blame Rask for his inability to make that save, even though, and I don't want to totally misrepresent it by saying he was on an island, because defenseman did start to crash in. But
and it's not like Pietrangelo deked him out of his jock.
He's not Wayne Gretzky. It was just switching to his backhand and roofing a puck.
Yeah.
He's got to come up with that. Yeah. I don't think, though, it should tarnish what he did this postseason.
No,
You're not, because that's my thing, is the two things can exist, right? You could hope for a better performance from him when he faces 20 shots in Game 7, but it doesn't take away from the fact that you probably don't get through the Toronto series if not for Rask. He still received, I looked at the Conn Smythe voting, I mean, he's still got I think 21 points.
Yeah,
in the
he
Conn
finished
Smythe
third place
vote.
in voting behind
O'Reilly and
Binnington. So.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think we were right on the other day talking about Conn Smythe. If they had lost that game 1-0, 2-1, and O'Reilly hadn't scored the goal, I think he would have
we got that one square on.
Yeah. So, good for us.
Take that victory.
So the Bruins lost. That's a bummer for them. It's going to be a long, short summer. And one thing I did want to kind of touch on, I think the way the season ended was a disappointment. The season on a whole, I don't think you can say was anything other than a success.
No,
right?
and I will wear the fact, and I still believe that the Stanley Cup final was a complete failure for the Bruins.
Yes.
Their season as a whole, though, was a raging success. And just to reiterate my point from the other day, because I had said that I felt if the Bruins lose by any margin in Game 7, it should be considered a colossal failure. And they had way too many opportunities. The scoring differential, the way that they played in Game 2, the breaks that they did not get in Game 5, that they put themselves in positions where they had to let the officiating take over. For one, it probably shouldn't have even gone 7 games, if you ask me. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this. I still remain relatively unimpressed with the Blues and felt that the Bruins, by and large, still were the more talented team. And that's an indictment of the Bruins. That is just underplaying to an extreme level. Now, you cannot win the Stanley Cup final on accident, so credit to the Blues. Stick tap, everything came together for them. That's fine, yippee. But the Bruins' inability to show up, particularly the top line, I mean, they have so much blood on their hands for what went wrong.
You can't lose 3 games at home either.
Absolutely not. That's embarrassing.
Or lose 3. Yeah, the whole thing was, the Stanley Cup final on the whole, including Game 7 or especially Game 7, bordered on embarrassing.
Abject failure.
Yeah, right. It's just, and that's okay sometimes. Like, it is what it is. The problem I see from the Bruins in the real big picture, though, is that, like, if the roles were reversed, it's something for St. Louis to build on, right? Strip the interim tag from Berube. Like, you've got a good core, some young talent there that you can build on. You're going. If it's a team like Toronto that gets to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, loses on home ice, sucks. But the thing, you're in a good spot going forward.
Right.
The Bruins, it feels like something you should be able to build on, but I think more so than anything else, it feels like just maybe their last chance at kind of building on their legacy, at least this core of players.
Yeah.
They have young talent. I don't want to sit here and say that the Bruins are all just a bunch of old guys, but for this group, this main group, whether it's Chara, Rask, Bergeron, Marchand, Krejci.
Those 5 guys who have been there for both cup
they're
runs. They're all 3 cup runs now.
They're no younger than 31 or 32.
Yeah, Marchand's the youngest, and he's 30.
And it's an older, 30.
Because I wrote that last night, because Marchand had talked about it. He's like, we don't know if we'll ever be back like this veteran group. I think Marchand's 30 and Rask is 31, and then it's like Krejci's 32. And
right, so I think in that regard, this takes on a much bigger, it's going to really suck when you look back on it in 10 years. And it's like, God, they had Game 7 at home to win the Stanley Cup. And, I wrote about this today on NESN.com. Like, the crowning achievement of this group is always going to be that they won the first Stanley Cup in 40 years for the Bruins. They restored the Bruins to elite status in the NHL. I think, Stanley Cups are rightfully what you determine the true value of a team's run. But this Bruins team has been consistently, save for a season or two, one of the best regular season teams in all of hockey. That doesn't mean anything, really, but it's just proof that they've been good for a long time, okay?
Right,
so,
and they missed the playoffs for a couple years before they, the whole
and that was part of this, it was just rebuild on the fly.
But still, I mean, ever since Bergeron and Chara came into the organization, there was only a few years apart, they have been contenders most years, at least, to get out of the first round of the postseason.
And so, like, maybe I'm overstating this, but I think there's a monumental difference between 1 and 2 Stanley Cups. Like,
Yeah.
if you have 2, that's
It's like
2
this
and a
wasn't
10,
an
15.
accident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's, in that sport, it maybe means even more because it's so hard to win. Or maybe it means less because that means it's, like, more random. I don't know. Like, I know in basketball, like, if you have 1, you might as well have none. Like, that was the whole thing with, like, the Celtics in 2010. It's like, if that Pierce, Allen, Garnett trio can get you 2, it's like, all right, now this is really cements your legacy. But I just think it would have been such a good feather in the cap for the group of 5 or whatever, or if you want to include, like, Neely and to a lesser extent Sweeney, considering the roles that they've played over the last 10, 15 years as well. I mean, even Cassidy with what he's been
in the organization for a while. Yeah.
And like I said, the thing that really stings about it is that you're probably not getting back.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get to this spot. Like you can't take that for granted. And a lot of things had to fall right for them this year. Tampa lost, Washington lost, Pittsburgh lost.
Right.
You didn't even have to do it yourself. I mean, you had to play Toronto, Columbus, Carolina. And I mean, Carolina deserved to get to that point, but they were clearly overmatched against the Bruins. So I don't want to say it was easy. It never is easy. And you go 7 games in the Cup final. It's a slog. But
well, you don't know if those chips are going to fall for you.
And I have a hard time believing that this team, 1 year older with that leadership group, is going to be able to get back to this
and I think that's going to be a tough reality for a lot of people to swallow, is that veteran group of players now, they're either at their peak and it's going to start declining, or they're already declining. Like it's not going to
sharply in some cases.
Right, it's not going to get better. So I think that they have a lot of great young talent where there's a lot to look forward to if they can keep some of these guys around.
Definitely, yeah.
However, they're going to find themselves in a weird limbo where you basically owe it to your veteran group to say, you guys are calling your own shots now. You can play the Chara thing.
Yep.
Like I think Bergeron can be a Bruin as long as he wants. Same thing with Marchand. I know Krejci's contract's coming up soon. I think if he wants to re-up, he probably could. But you're probably, I mean, you already said it. This was their best chance to get it one more time.
Which, like, obviously, we're not saying anything.
Well, right, yeah, that's not.
It's just lamenting it.
And I thought about it last night, and I wrote this. It's hard to believe that the run against the Blackhawks was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was the last time they had been there. Think about, Chara's going to be 48 in 6 years.
Yeah.
I would like to think he's probably going to be done by then. If Bergeron's 32, 33, that's a 38, 39-year-old
we're
Bergeron.
going on what it seems like the last 6, 7 years. I know it's not, it just feels that way, where Bergeron literally is limping to the finish line.
Right.
So, like, that's not going to get any better with age either.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, he's got some sort of chronic groin issue or something. But
right. Well, because he got groin surgery last offseason.
And he's done the hernia thing, I think, if I recall. Like, I feel like he's had that as well. So there's clearly something that I don't think that gets better as you get older.
No, not necessarily. And that's one thing, too, about this Stanley Cup run as opposed to the 2013 one, where in 2013 the Blackhawks were a wildly better team, I felt, and the Bruins were just gassed. Like they had just, you could tell by the time Game 6 rolled around of that series that they were just absolutely.
It was a microcosm for that entire series.
Yes, exactly. This team felt relatively healthy, and they don't have Kevin Miller or whatever, but nobody had any. I mean, I don't want to assume guys' health, but nobody had anything so egregious that it was keeping them out of the lineup or something like that.
You're opening yourself up to critique.
Ryan O'Reilly was playing with a cracked rib that he got in the second round. He won the Conn Smythe. So at that point, it's kind of tough to start making excuses for other guys where it's like, hey, if Marchand's hand hurts, that sucks. If he's detracting his team that much because he's unhealthy, he should not be playing. So I don't really accept the injury excuse too much either with this group.
I agree. So it's interesting. It's a bummer for them too, because I think you look at that core and it's like, especially Bergeron and Marchand, and Bergeron and Chara, and if you want to include Rask for just the totality of what he's done here, They deserve. I feel like they deserve that, but it just doesn't always work out that way. So
Yeah,
it is what it is.
Rask needed that one.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
he had earned it too.
like he's gonna be a Hall of Famer. He technically has his name on the Stanley Cup, but it's for a guy like that, it really takes you to it. Like he probably obviously stood to benefit the most from that. So
Yeah.
All right, let's do, like I said, hopefully we'll be back here in a couple of weeks or a week and a half to kind of go over the offseason, but we'll kind of transition to a real quick preview, a little appetizer, if you will, an appy. Bruins, the thing is, and kind of to contradict my last point, not a whole lot of turnover, probably.
No, it seems unlikely. So they only have 2 unrestricted free agents in Noel Acciari and Marcus Johansson,
Which
I think both of them are probably gone.
I agree. I think it's very
I think
likely they're
Johansson's postseason showing priced himself out of the Bruins plan.
And that's a guy who had postseason experience before this too. He
A
played
lot,
pretty well, yeah.
So they have the 3 notable RFAs in McAvoy, Carlo, and Heinen. They can afford to keep all of them. I think a lot of people are under the impression Carlo's going to get a lot of money. I think he's going to be in the John Moore range, between $2.5 and $3 million. That's just a guess. With Heinen, personally, I think he's going to be somebody that is always easy to keep around unless his offensive production just starts going through the roof. Because, I mean, I don't know what you look at for a comp for him, because he's more offensively skilled than your typical fourth liner who's making $1.5 million, but he also doesn't score enough to where you can start paying him like middle six money or Charlie Coyle money or whatever.
In a negotiation, that's you can point to that for
yes,
the Bruins.
So I don't think they're going to have much of a challenge keeping either of those guys, but you have to start looking at what happens when Krug's up next year. That he's going to get a lot of money.
And so I touched on this today as just a quick off-season primer on NESN.com, and there's been a lot of chatter already about trading Torrey Krug at some point this offseason. If I'm the Bruins, I'm trying to exercise every option I can to not have to trade Torrey Krug. Because I think he not only is one of your better players, but he's like one of those, he doesn't get enough credit for how important he, at least, I'm not in that room, but for how important it feels like he is to that entire operation. Like I think he's a pretty good glue guy, an underrated glue guy. Yeah. And he's a guy who, he logged the most amount of ice time in Game 7 for the Bruins. Like that's, when you needed a game to win, he's the guy that you leaned on. And he does a whole lot of things. He's getting better defensively. So, $5.25 million next year, that would go a long way in kind of freeing up cap space. But I try to cross every other bridge before I cross that one.
So here's kind of my take on this, and I don't really know how spicy this is. I'll let you be the judge.
Okay.
If puck drops on next season and Torrey Krug doesn't have an extension, he's gone.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Typically, I feel like particularly this management group doesn't like to let those bigger guys get into a season in contract limbo. They avoid it with Marchand. They avoided it with Pasternak. So I feel that if they don't have Krug signed to some sort of extension that they get done in training camp, that they get done at some point this summer, it seems likely that he will leave. Now, in addition to that, I feel the only way you keep Krug around is by shedding David Backes' contract.
I don't know how you're going to do
it. And I don't know how you will either. And I was looking at this the other day on Cap Friendly, and it floored me just how bad of a deal this was. But through this year, he had a full no movement clause, not just a no trade clause, a no movement clause. So now it's modified. So I think he gets a 10-team list or something like that.
8 teams for this year and then 15 for next year.
So my take for a while has been, well, you can probably try and find a team that needs to hit the cap floor. Like Ottawa's going to need some money, and you package him with the prospect. He's not going to have a team. You can tell David Backes, and credit to him, still wants to win.
Yeah.
So I think it's very unlikely that you find a suitor that's a team that needs to hit the cap floor. So that's going to make it really hard to move him unless you get him to waive his no trade clause, which I would say the chances of that are probably slim to remote.
It depends where you're sending him, but if he wants to win, he's not. I don't think a whole lot of contenders are out there looking to add, $8 million of real money and a $6 million cap hit for the next 2 years over a guy who is 35 years old and was benched for the most important games of the season.
Yeah, they should try to package him with Donato, send him back home to the Wild. I mean, that's That's just a random take. But, yeah, I mean, they're so crunched by that Backes contract.
Yeah,
and
it's tough.
You can't – it would be unfair to ask Krug to take a bridge deal.
Yeah.
Just say, wait until we can get Backes off the books, and then we'll pay you what you deserve. I mean, Krug's, how old is he now? Late 20s somewhere. Like, his next contract's going to take him into his 30s.
Yep.
And so I think it's a little unfair unless you just, had all sorts of bonuses that you could tuck in or something to say, hold tight for one more year. We'll give you a 1-year bridge deal at, whatever you're making now plus bonuses, and then we'll give you what you deserve. I don't see that being able to happen.
I'm just looking at like Kevin Miller, I guess, is maybe a trade candidate, but
yeah, he's got 1 more year.
Yeah, at $2.5 million, but he reportedly had a broken kneecap. He has an injury history, so I don't know who's going to be lining up to take him on. I mean, the Krejci thing always comes up, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if you gotten this far through that contract, you might as well ride it out and
finish it off,
continue to and try to. I think with him too, and it's going to be hard considering the salary cap position they're in with having to re-up these guys, but give them a right winger at some point and try to let him go.
Well, yeah, and their unwillingness to do that for years now, I mean, has kind of hosed themselves. That's very self-inflicted.
So, it'll be interesting. The draft, I really don't care about.
I'm not going to sit here and act like I know all these guys. Yeah.
So that'll be something that we can hit on next time. Off-season stuff that pretty much covers it. Like I said, we'll get in a little bit more moving forward, and then we will go on our summer vacation.
Cool.
At least from the podcast. We'll be here working and aggregating our butts off. But,
yes.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I do have a couple observations from yesterday. I thought it was interesting. So I covered the game for NESN.com, as had been the case for all the home games. Backes didn't take warm-ups. I don't know if that was a coach's decision, but typically you see Backes in some form or fashion, whether it's leaving even when he's been healthy scratch, like leaving the dressing room after games, things like that. He wasn't on the ice for warm-ups. Your healthy scratches can take warm-ups, so they want Wagner was out there. But Backes in camp for Warren. So I thought it was kind of interesting, and I'm not trying to fan any flames or say that this is some crazy stuff, but to have not seen Backes in any capacity, I thought was pretty fascinating.
Really weird spot for him.
It is, yeah. It must have been uncomfortable as hell. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, so when I was leaving the Garden shortly past 2 yesterday, or this morning technically, walking down Legends Way, and there are 2 people actually walking towards, back towards North Station, back towards the arena, and it was Sean Corrali and Danton Heinen. And Heinen was carrying a box that I don't know what was in it, but Corrali and Heinen, in street clothes, they were in shorts and a t-shirt, just walking back right towards the arena. And then I looked on Twitter later in the morning, and Matt Porter from the Globe had tweeted out that there were actually some players, and this was at right around that same time, had tweeted out that there were some players hanging out in the little clubhouse area. So right behind where they do the press conferences, there's it's basically their family room.
Yeah, right.
And so I guess there are a handful of players still hanging out and chilling there and just kind of spending time together. And so presumably my guess is that Corrali and Heinen went back there. But I think, you could tell how tough it was for a lot of those guys. I have, granted I haven't been covering professional sports for decades upon decades, but walking into that locker room was tough. A lot of people tweeted about it, but it wasn't overstated. The first thing I saw when I walked in was Nordstrom. He was walking kind of funny. I was like, oh, maybe he was hurt or something like that. And he was just head down, bawling his eyes out, real tears, red face. It was nothing I had ever seen before. And typically when you get into the locker room or the dressing room, most guys, they're out of their pads and their skates and everything. They have shorts and a t-shirt and a hat on. DeBrusk was sitting down, head in his hands, the entire time I was in the dressing room, which is 10 minutes. Full pads, skates still on and everything. Coyle still had most of his stuff on and was just then taking his skates and his sweater and everything off. You could tell how upset everybody was. The only one that it was tough to tell is Rask, but that's because he always keeps an even keel. But even for him, you could tell how upset it was. So it was a really bizarre scene.
Yeah, Chara was still in a sweater. As far as that box goes, I'm guessing a buttload of booze.
Probably. That's what I'd be doing.
Maybe they're coming from the package store across the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. I remember I was in there after 13, and I think kind of what we were touching on earlier, where it's like I think everybody realized that they were not the better team. You ran into a buzzsaw, a dynastic team like the Blackhawks, and I think they knew that even if they got to Game 7, they would be without Bergeron. That'd be a tough road to hoe. Going into the United Center and beating the Blackhawks in Chicago in a Game 7. So I think it was more of an acceptance in that regard. This one, I wasn't there, but everybody, to your point, everybody wrote or mentioned or tweeted that was like the most distraught they've ever seen a group of not only hockey players but professional athletes. So that's something I think that's interesting. I think it really meant a lot to these guys. I also think like just the dichotomy or the dynamic of these guys who beat the hell out of each other, play their asses off, play through injuries, do like all these real macho tough things. They all have these grizzly beards. They personify what you think it means to be a real big bad athlete thing, reduced to just bawling their eyes out. And they have no shame in it. Like it's just
good for them.
Right. They panned to the Bruins after that game, and you've got Marcus Johansson, a guy who's been here for 3 months or whatever it is. It was like his forehead was stapled to the boards. Like he was just had his head down, crying his eyes out on the bench. Marchand was crying. Right. Like it's just the raw display of emotion it reminds you how much this whole thing means and how difficult it is.
Right. Well, and the raw emotion seemed a lot different this year than it did in 2013, and I think that's to your point. Even as crushing as the Game 6 defeat was,
I think they
might
have been still in shock. Too,
right, which probably could have been it. But I mean, I think somebody asked McAvoy, what it's like knowing that this is going to be his last time playing with at least some of these guys, and he didn't want to answer. He basically said that he wasn't going to comment on it. But it is weird. I mean, you look around at that group, and it's like, Johansson and Achari probably are gone. You never know what's going to happen. You never know if you're going to be back in that spot. I mean, it has to be, as Cassie said, a pretty empty feeling.
It's a very good way to end this uplifting podcast experience. So that's good. Bruins just announced, by the way, breakup day Friday afternoon, midday Friday. So we will probably learn a little bit more too. That's something we didn't really hit on a whole lot because we don't know the extent of whatever injuries, but that's when we usually start to kind of figure out more and go and learn who's dealing with what. So I think we will. I think there will be quite a bit. I mean, there always is, but for a lot of those guys, I hope they were injured for their own case.
Right.
It would explain a lot.
Yeah.
So we will see. All right, that's Logan. I'm Mike. You've just been listening to the tremendous award-winning NESN.com Bruins podcast. I'm not going to tell you the awards, but just trust us. We've won them.
Don't look it up.
We will be back soon enough. Until then, thanks for joining us and enjoy the start of your hockey-free summer or hockey-free portion of your summer. It's been a long run here, so go to the beach and stuff. Goodbye.